All right, so we should be live right now. I'm just going to double check that we are indeed live. Yes, and there we go. So one of these days, I'm going to, inshallah, have my own team of people helping me. So that would be nice. I mean, we have people helping, but sometimes, these types of things. All right, so wonderful. So I'm really excited to introduce our guest today, Dr. Omar Javaid, and to say very quickly a little bit about Dr. Omar. And I had his bio right here. No, I don't see it. Oops. Forgive me. This is the problem with toggling back and forth between screens. Dr. Omar right now is in Karachi, Pakistan. And okay, here we go. So Dr. Omar Javaid has a PhD in entrepreneurship from the Institute of Business Management, an MS in Management Sciences from the Karachi Institute of Economics and Technology, an MBA from the Institute of Business Management with majors in marketing and a BE in Industrial and Manufacturing Engineering from NED University. NED standing for?
It's a Persian guy basically who established the university. I think his name was Nader Shah Idilji Dikshaw, something like that.
Amazing.
So basically initials of somebody who, the founder of the university.
I see.
Yeah.
And Dr. Javaid has, in addition, a total of 14 years of experience of working in the corporate, non-profit and educational sector. Dr. Javaid's core competence is mentoring new startups and ventures. Since 2010, he has helped hundreds of students in their entrepreneurial ambitions. He has also been empowering students to set up micro businesses for poor unemployed people and have successfully initiated around 500 such projects during his academic career up until now. And he has multiple publications, research articles, on all sorts of topics, not least of all Islamic economics and finance, microfinance, entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, political theory, and philosophy of economics and business management. So Dr. Omar, we're very blessed to have him with us today. He clearly has a very diverse and fascinating background, which we will all benefit from, God willing, today. I wanted to start by, first of all, thanking you for joining us, Dr. Omar, with your generous time. And I wanted to start by posing the question, if I may, that many people may think that how can one be an ethical entrepreneur? I mean, the idea being, isn't capitalism ipso facto evil? Isn't capitalism the cause of all the evils in the world? So therefore, if we're in that system, aren't we necessarily somehow supporting that system? That's not necessarily my view of things. I happen to be the son of my late father, was a very brilliant entrepreneur, and he was very ethical, in fact, in his own dealings. So that certainly isn't my viewpoint. But would you kindly address this issue, please, Dr. Omar? Thank you.
Yeah, I think. All right, where to begin with? First of all, I'm honored to be on your podcast. Thank you very much for having me. So the problem of ethical entrepreneurship, we need to first, I think, look at from this perspective that since when entrepreneurship is actually happening, and entrepreneurship is not a product of capitalism. It's the people have been starting businesses and running them since a very long time. There's been there is a book on history of enterprise by David Landis. It's an edited volume, and it goes back to 5,000 years. And they've given examples from Mesopotamia and the Babylonian civilization, and all of these. And people used to start businesses even back then. And since the time this idea of division of labor is there and was introduced in this into complex societies, and since the time when the idea of money came into being. And I think this is like, the evidence suggests that it's been like at least 5,000 years. Maybe it could be more, but the anthropological evidence suggests that it has been like 5,000 years at least. David Graeber is another author who has written a history of of enterprise, and since when money came into being. So it's almost a 5,000-year history, maybe more than that. And an industrial revolution, as we are aware, that it's a very recent phenomenon in comparison. It's like almost 300 years probably since when it actually started, and business has been going on since a long time. So a very, very important change actually happened when industrial revolution actually began, and when capitalism arrived into the scene. And the change was kind of ideological, and Karl Marx have actually identified that the nature of transition basically. Previously, money was used as a medium of exchange before industrial revolution, according to Karl Marx and other historians also. The purpose of money was to act as a medium of exchange and a store of value. And but something happened during the in Europe, where the meaning of a monetary unit, what a monetary unit actually is, what money actually is, that changed, right? And the purpose of business changed from exchanging goods. Now, if you're manufacturing something, or if you're a farmer, you're growing something, and then you would go to the market, and you would sell it, and you get some cash, and so that in you have some other needs, and subsequently you will use that cash to fulfill the purpose was to exchange stuff in the market. But when capitalism arrived, the money became the object of the doing business, right? The purpose of business was to make more money. I mean, you had some capital, and you invest that capital, you hire some labor, you buy some land, and you buy some machinery, have some industrial unit, which will produce something, and you would sell the stuff so that you can make more money. That was the ultimate goal of that. So money, instead of from being a medium of exchange, it transformed into the ultimate objective, the goal of the production activity or doing business. So when that actually happened, that probably changed everything. It was not just that the purpose of doing business is basically making a lot of money. It was the ideological shift which actually happened in Europe. Like if you read Marcuse, and if you even Adam Smith has talked about that. Hale Bronner has written about this while quoting Adam Smith, that it was this maximizing tendency, this maximization of wealth, perpetual constant maximization of wealth or capital, was seen as a very fundamental characteristic of human nature. There was a whole paradigm shift on who we actually are. Human beings, they were defined, they viewed themselves very differently before capitalism, and when the capitalism arrived, particularly the capitalist class, they started to define themselves as if the ultimate purpose of their existence is to keep on maximizing, and the maximization of wealth has a limitation, because typically wealth is defined something which is tangible. For example, if you have lots of wheat, you're growing wheat, you have lots of wheat in your warehouse, and that is your wealth. You might have gold in your wallet, that as well. But the problem here is that when you are maximizing, that the real wealth and the tangible wealth is limited, is in finite quantity. It cannot be maximized perpetually. So the idea of capital came into being, which was just an idea, in a sense that it is just represented by numbers. The value of stuff, for example, if you talk about shareholders' value, it's just a value. It's just an idea that a particular share in a company would value something, right? And how much this value can actually grow, and there is absolutely no upper limit to that. I mean, a company can actually grow in its financial value, I mean, unprecedented. There's absolutely no limit. For example, Apple is now a 2 point something trillion dollar company. um, would there be any upper limit, like in the next 10 years time, and somebody's going to say, no, okay, fine, we have grown enough, there is now we have reached the ceiling now, Apple is probably a $5 trillion, $10 trillion company now, we cannot go any further. So what exactly is being multiplied here? So the idea of financial capital uh, was a natural outcome of this, pursuit of perpetual accumulation of um, capital. Capital is the right term to use in this context. So, there is a whole shift in paradigm in what it means to be a human being, what it means to make money. And subsequently, when this paradigm was shifting, the idea of, moral values and ethics also, changed eventually. There's a very good book by Dr. Javed Ansari. He's an economist in Pakistan, and he talked about how this transition actually took place in ethics, in the moral criteria to define, what is differentiate from right and wrong. And ultimately, from a very purely from an economic point of view and from a capitalist point of view, ethics was defined as in a way that anything which is obstructing in the process of accumulation of more capital was seen as unethical, and anything which is benefiting in the process of accumulating more capital was seen as ethical. All right, means and any activity done by, for example, if somebody some trader, some entrepreneur is selling counterfeit products, that is going to eventually just destroy his reputation, and subsequently if when his credibility is destroyed, he will not be able to make more money. So uh, every immoral action was seen as a hindrance in the process of capital accumulation. Because if you go back to Protestant ethics, for example, if you go back to Max Weber and what he called the Protestant Spirit, which Weber believed, and there was another historian, I'm forgetting his name, Tony, I think Tony and Weber both have written about this, that the Protestant ethics was the founding, also provided the impetus or the primary idea behind this transition and ethical uh, philosophy of capitalism, that if you're pious, if you're hardworking, if you are not cheating anybody in the market, if you're honest, if you are doing all of these this is fundamentally necessary to do business in the market. Market cannot function without all of these values. But what is the end product of being honest and being pious and being um, avoiding deceit and avoiding any kind of malpractice? The ultimate outcome was seen as, of course, the accumulation of more money and eventually. But as we move forward, and right now, if you look at the way market is operating, it appears that this idea of end justify the means have any kind of taken over. In order to maximize, now every possible means are being taken. Now it is even possible to um, deceive customers or manipulate your suppliers and um, uh, exploit your laborers. And if you talk about the environment, it is very, very convenient to even um, damage the natural environment in the whole process of capital accumulation. Why? Because at the end of the day, you are making a lot of money. And instead of acting in a responsible way, it is now possible to pretend that you are acting in a responsible way. So thanks to the media and the way we can actually present stuff on mainstream media and now on social media as well, it is possible to appear responsible. It is possible to appear that you are taking care of each one of your stakeholder. And in the process, when people investigate, it turns out that things are not as good as it seems, the way they are presented. So coming back to your question, is it really possible to do business in ethical sense, or is it ethical entrepreneurship really possible? Then there are two. I think we have talked about two things. Number one, how do we define ethics? And number two, if you're trying to define ethics in a very traditional way, then we have to see what entrepreneurship actually is. Are we also seeing entrepreneurship in a traditional context or not? So ethics and entrepreneurship both can be defined in a very capitalist sense also, and both can be defined in a very traditional context as well. And in a traditional context, you talk about, still lots of people do business in a very traditional manner. Um, so if, in a very traditional sense, when we look at what money actually is, when we define what what is the relationship a person, an entrepreneur, has with money, all right, then subsequently the whole dynamics of actually shifts um, into something else. So it depends upon from which paradigm you're actually seeing. From a capitalist paradigm, if you change the criteria of what ethics actually is, then subsequently you can still be ethical from a capitalist sense. But again, now you're looking at ethics, looking at what is right and what is wrong from very different paradigm now, right? So is it really possible to agree and give a clean check to the capitalist idea of ethics? Then that's another debate. I think we can definitely debate on that. Then I think this is something which I can
Well, no, this is wonderful.
yeah.
There's so many things to pick up on. I'm not. I have a bunch of notes here. That's wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful summary, a very detailed and nuanced summary of how things were historically down to the present. Some things that, I mean, just in no order of preference here, but a couple of things that popped into my mind that when you're describing the nature of how capitalism works, where the primary focus is literally on the accumulation of capital, and it can be limitless, of course. And you're mentioning, by contrast, when it comes to tangible wealth, there's necessarily a finiteness to that. And it occurred to me that we are now, have been for a number of years now, right, going through a major shift as far as how even the so-called tangible stuff looks like, because we're dealing with a digital economy. Right. So apparently this kind of these sort of where historically products would have been and were physical.
Yeah, exactly.
Required physical places and spaces to
store them. You can talk about cryptocurrency in this context,
Cryptocurrency, and I mean, absolutely cryptocurrency. And also I was thinking just where things are going, right? People now talking about multiverses and if that's the right term, that the fact that human beings, we will have avatars in these digital spaces, and there's literally a company, I saw a video not too long ago where they're interviewing the founder of this company, where he literally, or his company, and I can't remember the name of the company, they literally sell in the digital sphere, they sell real estate. One can buy property that
absolutely.
There's a physical counterpart to in the real world. So all these, uber expensive places in Manhattan, you can now buy the digital version of that, and it will be yours. It's a very weird, so I mean, that's one piece to the puzzle. But one thing I would like for you to address, but also importantly, you pointed out how capitalism entailed a rethinking or reconceptualization of what it means to be human. Where the human being, as it were, is fundamentally replaceable, right? In essence, if someone is not productive, I mean, you're mentioning also the ethics of capitalism as such, that it is about what is more conducive and productive of greater wealth accumulation. Therefore, it follows if individuals are not conducive to that, if they're not supportive of that model,
Yeah,
then they are ipso facto not only a hindrance, but within this ethical model, they somehow should be done away with. I mean, taken to its logical conclusion, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
And this is what we're witnessing in sort of, as it were, highly capitalistic countries such as the US. More so than still, thank goodness. I mean, I live in the UK, which is very capitalistic, but it does have this history. You would know better than me. It does have a history on social welfare and things like that. It's about that's being systematically
Yeah.
undermined right now. I mean, there's a genuine active push to undermine all of these things.
Yeah.
So I was hoping you could touch, please, upon the question of the digital economy, what that means as far as as far as the future of humanity, shall we say, I mean, to use such grand terms, but also relatedly, how the human being is thought of. Even my intuition is, my sense is that we're even more replaceable in a digital context. I don't know. What are some of your thoughts, please?
So where does this idea of having a digital alternative actually came from? I think we need to start from there probably. What I feel that, when we talk about limitlessness, uh, and you see so many things going on, being invented in the last 100 years, where particularly in the financial economy, starting from the financial economy, that first you have this idea of capital, which can actually accumulate up to infinity, and then you have this idea of freedom. Then there is absolutely no upper limit. But when you talk about a human society, there it is not, humans being are not really free to do everything else. I mean, there are natural limitations, like a freedom of one person can actually become a tyranny for somebody else, because there are boundaries we need to respect for each other. So because of these natural limitation, what I see is that the technology is somehow making it possible to overcome these limitations one way or the other. Starting from the Nietzsche's concept of Übermensch, the person who is, like a Superman, who is capable of, doing stuff which is a normal human being cannot do. If you compare an ordinary human being, we are quite limited beings in so many different ways. We cannot see beyond a certain limit. We cannot hear beyond a certain limit. We cannot run beyond faster than a certain limit. We eventually die after there's lots of natural limitations which are there, and also because of social constraints we cannot do a lot of stuff. So, but again, the idea of freedom to do everything, to become everything, is still there. So how do we do that? So voila, we have the digital world where all of that is really possible. So you can just put on a VR headset, and you can do whatever the hell you want to do in that particular environment. All right. So when the capital were digitalized, and in parallel to that, we also see the digitization of almost every aspect of human life eventually, one way or the other. So the way you're mentioning that, you can buy properties in Manhattan, in a digital version of Manhattan, and technologically right now it is possible. It's just probably just a matter of time, I think, that in fact, I think Elon Musk was already talking about this, that we can literally put ourselves in a virtual world which would look exactly like the real world. The technology now proceeding in that, even right now, I can see these rendering, these games, computer games, which look almost real. There's hardly any difference. Like, you can imagine what we will be in the next 5 to 10 years from now.
The sort of theory to that point in Silicon Valley, many sort of Silicon Valley people. I think I may be mistaken. The idea was first floated by this philosopher at Oxford by the name of Nick Bostrom, that we are living in a simulation. We're already living, and so people like Elon Musk, right? this notion that we could already be living in a simulation, if the technology has advanced so far that we can't tell. I mean, I think this is a kind of demonic suggestion ultimately, but people like Elon Musk and Nick Bostrom, they're theorizing, right? There's X number of, there's a certain amount of possibility that may be the case. This is where it's heading, to your point. I mean, I don't think we're living in a simulation yet, not the way
maybe we are.
Maybe we are. Well, I mean, maybe we are. No, that's also true. Like, how would we know, right? I mean, I think
how would we know?
This is where, for me, religion plays a very important role, as a touchstone, but not to necessarily digress on that point yet. But I would like to bring it back to religion eventually. But to your point, how virtually all aspects, so many aspects of life can already be lived, as it were, online, to the point where, I mean, this is literally an issue with men of all ages, young and old, that they literally prefer porn, right? The real thing. They literally prefer porn to the real thing. And I mean, I was reading a while ago, not too long ago, actually, in Japan, actually, there's a major issue with men and women preferring not to have physical interaction. So it's very, very interesting. So I just wanted to please continue. Yes, I wanted to slip in the question of porn. This is something I think a lot about. I think it's symptomatic, right, of deeper sort of problems, right? And porn, where it's about sex, sex, which is, from an Islamic point of view, a very sacred act when performed under the correct circumstances, and other traditions as well. Sex was historically highly, quote unquote, regulated for the very reason that it is such a powerful thing, and done correctly, it literally is the only means that we have thus far. Things are changing. Of bringing up, other human beings into this world, right? Things are changing, of course, because all sorts of Matrix-like stuff in the pipeline. Anyway, so much to talk about, but please.
Exactly.
And the Matrix, of course, relates to the whole question of simulation. But anyway,
I'm just wondering, what should I talk about the reality being a simulation, or should I talk about?
That's a great point.
What?
I mean, please continue what you're saying about how things have been, heading towards this utter sort of digitalization or digitalization of all aspects of human life. What that means as far as how the human being itself is viewed, right? I mean, there was, so many relevant points, but something that comes to my mind immediately again is I was recently reading not too long ago, I'm sure you came across it as well, that Microsoft literally has a patent for these chatbots, which can literally, mimic your deceased loved ones. That in chatting with them, and that's what they already have. Who knows what's coming down the pipeline, like virtual. I mean, anyway.
All right. So I think the whole impetus, the whole primary motivation behind, turning into the reality into moving into the digital reality is that, the kind of lives we are living in right now are so full of limitations. Billions of dollars of research funding is being put into research. How to make death obsolete, literally, right now. So even we are moving in that direction also, and let's just assuming if it is really possible to genetically modify human beings in a way that we don't grow old, let's suppose, and we can actually age up to 200, 300 years. What the hell a person is going to do for 300 years in this world? I mean, other than that, putting himself into a simulation and maybe, do whatever he wants to do in that particular reality, because physical reality, obviously, there are so many limitations around. The society does not let you do so many things, But that's not really the case with the digital simulation, of course. So there is this idea of transhumanism. Human beings are limited, and we need to enhance our capabilities using technology, and probably it is also justified from a very evolutionary perspective that this whole process of evolution has not been completed as yet. And there's a very nice book by Yuval Noah Harari, the title is Homo Deus, and he's talking about that we're moving in the direction where we were Homo sapiens previously, and now we are gradually using technology to convert ourselves into Homo Deus, human gods, basically. So it's a really interesting situation where we are going to lead, because in such a kind of a scenario, because one thing is which we need to look into is that all of these technological adventurism require a lot of capital. I mean, it is not possible for the poor people to do that. Only a rich minority can actually purchase these technologies and these simulation machines, or get themselves into, or maybe if it is about genetically modifying ourselves into immortals, potential immortals, then of course the technology is going to come at a price, and most likely it is going to be used by a very handful of individuals, probably a very minority, 0.01% of the whole society. What about the rest of them? So are we talking about at least theoretically that if these technologies can actually are developed and materialized and used and available in the market for people to actually purchase, so is it going to really create a class of superhumans which are eventually going to rule the rest of the population or not? I don't know if you have seen this TV show, the Squid Game. It's very famous right now on Netflix. I'm not going to spoil it for the listeners, but the whole idea.
I think I got up to like episode 5 or 6, and then I think all the violence got to me a little bit, so I stopped watching it. No, but very fascinating.
So in the last episode, the person who actually win the game meets the creator of the game, and he was very upset because of all of the things that he has seen and gone through, and he actually asked the creator, why the hell did you do that? And the creator explained that I was very rich and my life got so boring. That was his reply. And I wanted to play all these games which I played in the childhood in a way which I can really enjoy right now with some enhancement to that. And that was the justification he gave that. There's another interesting TV show at Netflix by the name of.
On that point, I made a post maybe a couple of weeks ago whenever it was on Squid Game. When I started to watch it, it occurred to me that Squid Game could be one of two things, right? And it could potentially be both or even more. But first, it could be at best. This is how I kind of phrase it. At best, like the best case scenario could be that it's just a metaphor for how society is.
It is.
That we are rapacious, and the kind of structures are such that if we become all too often sort of indentured servants, right, and that in order to even imagine getting out of indentured servitude, we have to virtually kill ourselves, right? So that was my best case scenario. And the worst case scenario was maybe it's a literal description in so many words of where the world is heading, whereby we have these super lords who get, or maybe this stuff already, maybe, here's an idea, here's a conspiracy theory, maybe this is what already happens, right?
Absolutely.
All the freaking wars in the world, like started by, all these, companies and people behind the scenes with lots of wealth and power and munitions, all in the name of, freedom and fighting terrorism and all this. I mean, it's lies and lies and more lies. Like anyone with 2 brain cells to put together must be able to see through the lie by now. And all the poor brown people, typically brown and like non-white people, they pay the price, right? So we are kind of these types of people are cannon fodder, right, for the whims of, I don't know, that's one conspiracy theory. But anyway, so, and the other show that you're about to mention?
Can I take a phone call? I'm getting a phone call right now.
Oh, yeah, please. Yeah, no worries. Yes, no worries. So, yeah, as Dr. was quickly grabbing the call, I'll sort of continue the thought about Squid Game. It's a fascinating show, and I mean, apparently the article's coming out now about how the author of the show, it was 10 years in the making, and he sort of shopped it around various places, and it was rejected for the longest time because people, I guess people on these boards who decide whether these shows get greenlighted or not, they kept saying it was too unlikely and too violent for it to fly, for people to accept it. And and of course, it turns out it's Netflix's biggest sort of blockbuster show ever, which is in itself is very instructive. In itself, it's telling us, it's indicating that there's something in the kind of in the public greater sort of unconscious, the zeitgeist as such, that people really feel maybe on one level that we are pawns in some larger game, possibly, and or that related or unrelated, maybe we have a significant sort of impetus and desire, almost, right? One could say the shadow within us benefits from and enjoys the aspect where our violence is meted out on the screens. The violence within has an outlet without, and this was, of course, one of the was and is one of the intentionalities behind the carnival, right? People's most carnal desires, things that would be unimaginable on a day-to-day basis, whether violence, whether sex, all sorts of gratuitous things. There was one day of the year set aside for society to kind of engage in those acts, just as a means of purging, as a means of releasing these kind of demons. And now, of course, we have on a daily basis this purging that we can access through means such as Netflix. It's all very, very fascinating. We live in a daily carnival. So I wonder what does that say about the human psyche if we are literally living in a daily carnival? So we're still. I'm just saying a few more words while we're waiting for Dr. Omar, who will be joining us shortly. I wanted to also raise the question. And sort of following on from some of the things Dr. Omar was mentioning about transhumanism. This is an area that I happen to have delved into a fair bit. Actually, at one point, I was very seriously considering doing a PhD on the question of transhumanism, which Dr. Omar mentioned, is essentially this philosophy, this understanding that human beings we have attained to as much biological evolution as we can through a kind of natural so-called process, and that the next step in our evolution, interesting word, would be interesting to unpack who fits into this question of our or human even, but our next step will come through technological means. And of course, there's a lot. I mean, this is factually the case. This is not conspiracy theory. It's quite openly discussed. There's a huge amount of money being poured into research whereby people seek to become immortal. There are people in this world today, very often tech billionaires and people of that kind of mindset, who ultimately don't have have a notion of a transcendent view of reality, where they believe the horizontal is all that there is, and that the vertical dimension is just pie in the sky rhetoric. People like that believe, well, if the horizontal dimension is all that there is, then the way in which we, I mean, because I believe it's a fundamental human, it's part of the human consciousness fundamentally to know deep within our souls that we have an immortal dimension, but that immortal dimension is in the spiritual realm. And Dr. Omar is rejoining us right now. But so my understanding of people who self-identify as transhumanists, for example, is that in doing away with the vertical dimension, they necessarily, because of this innate realization that we are fundamentally immortal on a spiritual realm, but because we've done away with the spiritual realm, we seek to then horizontalize that sort of immortality that is spiritual. Therefore, it follows that we certain people would like to live forever, and they will stop at nothing in their attempts to attain to immortality in this world. It's a very, very, very troubling world in which we live, wherein if a finite number of people, a very finite, small fraction of the world's population have virtually infinite amounts of wealth, wealth in the capitalistic financial sense, if they have virtually limitless amounts of financial capacity, then their thinking, their tendency will be to seek to not only maintain that, but to continue to grow that. And because that limitless financial capacity, because it is dependent on the very fungible and replaceable nature of humanity, everyone else, it entails a hugely and Dr. Omar's back, and I think you'll have to quickly unmute yourself, Dr. Omar. It will entail a philosophy wherein those who are the haves, they are ultimately superhuman. They are ultimately godlike, homo deus in Harari's sort of phrasing. So I was just kind of saying a few things following on from some of your points about transhumanism, that these are some of the background sort of ideas and ideologies that I feel inform these sort of I don't know, these ideologies. Is transhumanism, it could be classed as an ideology, a philosophy, or whatever.
Yeah, it can be.
Right. So to continue, we were talking about the digitalization of the human being itself, and what that means as far as excuse me, how we understand humanity. How do we understand life? How do we understand wealth? Would you like to comment maybe on a couple of those things, but also you're mentioning about the problem with the notion of the limitlessness, like having a notion somehow following on from Nietzsche's notion of the Übermensch, the overman or the superman or the superhuman, that human beings somehow, right? I mean, the famous, infamous quote, "God is dead," right? But the next line is of Nietzsche's that most people don't quote, or very often aren't even aware of: "God is dead, you have killed him," right? We, without all our sort of historicism and things like that, we've done away with God, and what happens in it is we end up replacing God with deified versions of ourselves. Uh, okay, so Dr. Omar, so I'm having to take some calls, but so to continue on this along these lines, um, if the limitless, if the notion of the limitless, the infinite, as it were, if the notion of the infinite, which is historically, from a traditional spiritual point of view, is the domain of the divine, right? We to use the metaphor of the cross, the symbolism of the cross, as described, as beautifully uh, uh, um, understood and described by the great metaphysician René Guénon, that it implies that there's a vertical dimension with which there's a vertical dimension to reality which is always piercing the horizontal dimension. So we live in a horizontal dimension in our physicality and our day-to-day sort of activities, etc., but it's always being pierced by the vertical dimension. And the vertical dimension, in reintegrating ourselves into the vertical dimension, that's the source of our succor, that's the source of our peace, that's the source of our stability and health and healing. If we do away with the vertical dimension, what happens is the vertical dimension, which alone belongs to God, which can only belong to God and the divine, that dimension, we replace ourselves. We replace ourselves. We take the place of the divine. We deify ourselves. And this is the very nature of the limitless, the infinite, which again, to repeat, can only belong to the divine. When the limitless, who is the divine, who is God, he, she, it, because ultimately God is genderless, the limitless in which we partake ourselves, we then completely replace with our own finite natures. And I think I can't help but feel that this is one of the reasons why we have a rabid and very rabid and diseased form of entrepreneurship in the world today. It's endlessly rapacious, and it seeks to take over and consume the entire world because we have done away with our sense of the divine. Okay, so
I'm sorry for the interruption. Basically, my son is at the school, and the van driver actually left him at the school, and I had to making phone calls with the relevant people, so to make sure he gets back.
Horizontal is very real, right? The horizontal, we have horizontal responsibilities, and I mean, when we have a holistic understanding of things, when we have a holistic understanding of the world, which I try to have, and failingly, because I'm human at the end of the day, then the horizontal responsibilities we have ultimately reintegrate us into the into the vertical dimension, because our children, our families, they're part and parcel of our human life, but there's ultimately a divine quality to that because it's divinely blessed. And in many ways, the digital, not to harp on about it, but to harp on about it because it's very real. And I feel typically we don't think enough about these things, not yourself or myself, but very often people don't think enough about these things, that the digital world is seeking to completely reconfigure all these traditional relationships. So could you say a little more about that?
So I think what's actually happening, I'm just thinking it out right now. Maybe this idea of this infinite and limitlessness is already there somewhere in our unconscious mind. And previously, people used to meditate and do all that spiritual stuff, and and used to access this limitlessness or infinity within themselves on a spiritual level. And but we all know for a fact that something changed in Europe, and they excluded religion out of this whole equation. Spirituality was demeaned as superstition, and So human being were seen as a material being, Thomas Hobbes, we are just nothing else other than, just flesh and bone, and there is no such thing as a soul, etc., etc. So we are material beings. So I think reducing human being into something material did not also took away our, this our urge to connect with the infinite on a spiritual level. Probably that was somewhere in the unconscious. And when instead of, trying to achieve that on a spiritual internal level, we try to, achieve that on an external plane. And we try to accumulate the stuff and, extend ourselves into physical reality. But physical reality was also putting us lots of constraint in the process, and subsequently technology came to the rescue. Now we have the digital world, and there we can, try to expand ourselves in an infinite way. But again, I don't think we will be able to satiate that particular desire which exists on a spiritual level by extending ourselves even in digital world, because that is not a replacement. Like if I'm thirsty, I cannot drink a fizzy drink or a soft drink or a Pepsi or a Coke. I can, no matter how much I drink, that is not really going to satiate my thirst for water, and that, or probably that is not even going to, do the work of what water actually does to my body. So if I need vitamin C or vitamin D, for example, then subsequently I cannot replace it with something else. Just like that, there's a need on a very spiritual level, probably. And that again, that totally depends on how do we actually see ourselves. Do we see ourselves as spiritual beings who happens to have a material form, or do we see ourselves just as material form who does not have any soul or anything else like that? But if we do have a spirit inside or soul inside of us, and that does have this um, thirst or yearning to connect to the infinite, then subsequently, I don't think we can actually fulfill that by, extending ourselves into the physical world. Either it is digital, or digital is also part of the physical in a way. No? It's just an extension of our experiencing that through our five senses. Maybe right now we can just see stuff in the digital world. We cannot touch stuff, we cannot smell stuff, and then, but maybe it might be possible in the future somehow, connecting our brain directly um, into the digital space. Maybe we can send signal directly to those to the neurons which are responsible for, getting signals from our sense of smell or stuff like that. So again, I don't think really by extending ourselves in a virtual world or in a physical world, we've already seen that is not possible. But even if we do that in digital world, that will not satiate our urge to the infinite, which can only be possible maybe through our, extending ourselves in the spiritual sense.
Indeed. No, I fundamentally believe that also. And I think we will perhaps increasingly be finding more, more and more people will become digital refuseniks. People will increasingly decide to disengage from the digital sphere, and quite possibly such people will become outcasts of society, because people who, this is increasingly the case, right? People who, say, of older generations who don't engage online, they have, let's say, COVID, for example, really showed up the problems of how society is structured. Let's say in the West, in the UK, I know a lot of older people, because of COVID restrictions, they had to isolate and things like that. They were really suffering.
I'm sorry.
So I think oh shit, I was talking without being I was talking all this time without unmuting myself. Okay, so let's continue. So I very much agree with you that the digital can never replace the digital can never replace the actual, right? The virtual can never replace the actual. But somehow we live in a world today where the narrative has been turned on its head, and it said that the virtual is better than the actual, right? We have these TV screens, right? I mean, with these insane sort of pixelations where TV pictures and shows and movies and things like that, they actually look better than real life, right? So I think it is just a matter of time to continue the metaphor of porn, this unfortunate metaphor, but I think it's very symptomatic of where we're heading, that you know, the actual world in some sense also, and this is how we're wired, right? That if certain areas of the brain are becoming stimulated by the digital, by the artificial ultimately, and we're getting this kind of buzz, then after a while, and we become addicted to that buzz, right? There's this whole issue with dopamine, having too much dopamine in our systems today. It's a challenge. So maybe we'll have refuseniks, people deciding not to engage with the digital, but maybe they'll become outcasts. Who knows? Now, all of that being said, these are the problems. These are some of the, everything we've been talking about thus far sort of encapsulates some of the major issues with where things have been going for so long. Now, what are some of the solutions? How can we bring a very real ethical dimension to our engagement in the entrepreneurial sphere?
I think we have to start from, also connecting with the discussion we had about, extending ourselves in a digital space. First, I think we need to define who we actually are as a human being, who we actually are, what we are actually made of. You just mentioned about pornography, and there are so many other stuff which is addictive. Typically, all the stuff which is online is designed in a way, the games and the stuff, social media, all of that designed in a way that eventually it becomes addictive for people, for the users in particular. I've been reading about addiction and why people get addicted. For example, I have listened and read the perspective of 3 experts: Gabor Mate, Johan Hari, and Marion Woodman. All 3 have done a lot of work with addicts and to understand what their mind is actually doing when they're basically all of them actually saying the same thing, that addicts are basically trying to escape something, and they're trying to escape the pain they're feeling, either because of some kind of living in a toxic situation, or being in some kind of a toxic relationship, or maybe because of poverty they are suffering, or maybe they have some kind of a trauma. So they are in some kind of pain, right? And because of that pain, subsequently it is too so much for them that they cannot handle it, and subsequently when they come out across something which is addictive, give them these dopamine hits perpetually. So eventually they get addicted to the stuff, but at a fundamental level they're trying to escape something. Either it is because they don't understand themselves. You might have seen so many rich people getting into using very hard drugs, despite the fact they're rich, they're famous, they have everything in their lives, despite still they are not able to feel satisfied with the life, and they feel this I don't know what to call it, this existential void, or maybe emptiness inside of them, that still they want to escape that. So is it really I think the fundamental problem of one of the fundamental problems of the modern society is that the understanding of who we actually are, who is a human being, that is probably built on a very flawed foundation. And probably this is where we need to start from to have a definition and understanding of who we actually are, which is comprehensive enough, which actually kind of cover every aspect of our being in a way. And subsequently, when a particular aspect will be recognized, for example, Stephen Covey has done this. He said we have actually 4 aspects of our being. There's the physical aspect, then there's the brain, intellectual stuff, where the intellectual stuff actually happens. There's this emotional stuff, and there is spiritual stuff. So we are actually made of four dimensions: the mind, the body, the heart, and the soul. And if you're just going to cater the need of the very physical needs of the body, a few needs of the mind, and we're going to leave soul out of the equation, we're going to leave heart out of the equation subsequently, then obviously we are going to have an individual who is not going to feel very satisfied with his life. In fact, if you read Jungian, I've been reading quite a bit of Jungian psychology, and Jung himself has argued this many times, that the fundamental problem of the Western man is that he is disconnected from his own being. He thinks by becoming too rational, he's going to solve all of his problems. But by being too rational, he's kind of ignoring his emotional and his spiritual part of his existence. And subsequently, as a result of that, there is so much depression and these mental illnesses that you actually see in Western society. Jungian psychology is very vocal on this particular point, because the way they have defined who is a human being is very limited. That is like leaving out some major aspect of our existence. And once we redefine it in a way which is complete and which covers every aspect of our being, and subsequently we'll be able to identify what our needs are on a spiritual level, and intellectual level, on a emotional level, and a physical level also. And once we have the list, and subsequently we can do stuff to make sure that those needs are actually fulfilled in the appropriate manner, right? You cannot just, the way I was giving this example of vitamins, vitamin C and vitamin D, if, for example, you cannot eat proteins and assume that the proteins are going to do the stuff of vitamins in your body. The needs which vitamins fulfill cannot be fulfilled any other way. So just like that, we have emotional needs, we have spiritual needs, we have intellectual needs, curiosity, for example. We are curious about, so we want to know stuff. We have physical needs, and unless all of those needs are fulfilled, subsequently we will have to think of a society which is built around the idea of honoring and understanding, making sure that all of these needs are actually fulfilled. And as far as my understanding is concerned, that before Industrial Revolution and before this Scottish Enlightenment and this whole ideological change which took place in Europe, in many traditional societies, they did had a much more comprehensive understanding of who we actually are, and they would make sure that most of our needs are fulfilled in different ways. I have to take the phone call again. I'm sorry.
So these are again some very, very important points that the Western man, as Jung points out very importantly, and now increasingly globally, it's not just whatever happens starts in the West finds its way to the rest of the world.
Everywhere else probably.
Right. So if Western man believed, still does, that he, she, it can think his way or her way out of his problems, that's a problem.
That's
because
a problem.
Very often, all too often, the issues that we face as human beings originate from aspects that aren't, that can be supra rational, right? That can be metaphysical, that can be physical as well. But those things have to be dealt with holistically. I mean, again, I try to maintain a very holistic understanding of things. And to that point, you're saying that historically society, contrary to a lot of the propaganda, shall we say, propaganda meaning, look, this is the story, this is the narrative. Human beings, we have been getting better and better. The propaganda of progress, right? That we're inevitably getting better and better and better. Therefore, it follows that whatever preceded us was worse than what we have today. So based on that sort of that story, based on that propaganda, what came before us, they didn't know what they were doing. And yet we find, when we do a little bit of digging, historical research, etc., that human beings in all climes, right, had a much more sort of grounded view of things.
Grounded view,
maybe people didn't necessarily live as long as we do today, or maybe they did in many instances, but at least, there was a certain quality of life. And I don't, maybe this is something of a romanticization, but I'm not entirely convinced. To what extent is it a romanticization?
I think I can think of two references right now. Karl Polanyi had written about this, that when modernization is spread and the influence of industrial revolution is spread all across the world through this phenomenon of colonization, people became better off economically, but their subjective well-being was reduced. This is what Polanyi is talking about in 1944. And recently, Harari wrote something very similar in 2017. He also said this with people previously, they had a worldview, they knew how to fit themselves into that particular worldview, and that kind of made sense to them. Even Nietzsche talked about this. If the life is suffering unless you find a meaningful purpose, something like that. He said something on the same lines. So the worldview they actually had gave them a sense of meaning, and they were able to integrate all of their experiences.
This is so fundamental, isn't it? Exactly. This is so fundamental and this is well recognized, right, in the literature, in philosophical literature, etc., that we no longer have right? Humanity, let's say in the West, and now very much in the rest of the world, no longer has a unifying story, right? The meta-narrative has fallen apart. So the meta-narrative, again, to your point, allows us to know our place in the universe.
Absolutely.
If I know what my place is in the universe and the cosmos, whatever language you use, then I kind of have something of a sense of how I'm meant to go about my, my days, right? Interpersonally and so forth. And without that, left to our own devices, what do we have?
I'm sorry.
Without that, without the benefit of an overarching narrative, without meaning in our lives, right? What are we left with? Meaningless.
Absolutely. Right now, you are seen as a product of an accident. Accident which happened billions of years ago, and subsequently, through a chain reaction, an evolutionary process. The story. We were like very primitive beings previously, and subsequently the process of evolution, and in millions of years we are what we are right now, and subsequently the process hasn't stopped yet, and subsequently is going to keep on going forward just like that. But at the end of the day, we are product of an accident which had absolutely no meaning in itself. At least this is what the mainstream view is talking about. And every meaning that human being has actually come across is actually man-made. We have actually constructed that particular meaning through a process of, and even religion is seen in the same light. Religion is also seen as a construct, a cultural construct created to have a story to make sense of whatever is actually happening. But science come forward and tell us, no, none of that is true. Basically, we are just a bunch of atoms, just randomly spread across the universe. Somehow order has been created, and we're not really sure what exactly created all of this order. Probably just an accident. So this narrative obviously does not really give you a very meaningful sense of existence.
Well, and within that narrative, right, how can we therefore speak of ethics in any truly philosophical?
Absolutely. What exactly is ethics? What do we mean by ethics in that sense? Maybe it is if we see it from this perspective, that the ultimate destiny of humanity is to become a better version of themselves, then anything which obstructs us to become a better version of ourselves would be seen as unethical. Maybe I don't know. But again, what exactly is the better version of ourselves? The stuff which billionaires are thinking, or is there going to be any democratic perspective that we can actually involve to determine what is exactly is the better perspective?
So if the underlying, and I think one could very seriously argue that this is ultimately a religious, spiritual imperative to become better version of ourselves, but with certain conditions, right? Better versions of ourselves, not qua ourselves, but better versions of ourselves in relation to the divine, right? And so if it's become, if the narrative is no, we must become better versions of ourselves, and infinitum, qua ourselves as individuals, then how, like, the only reason I have to be quote unquote ethical, or nice to other people, because in doing that, it facilitates my own betterment. But to the point at which, they are not helping me in my own betterment, then everyone else is completely irrelevant. So it's very, very problematic. I mean, a lot of the discussions that happen in business circles, right? The idea of sort of ethics and things like that. It's very often around, well, partly because significantly, right? You know this better than I do. Significantly because this is part of the current zeitgeist. We have to be more, environmentally conscious. We have to be more sort of inclusive and sort of Western context and things like that, but not because those things in and of themselves are better per se, but it will make us look better, and now there are all these conditions, right, that different companies are expected to meet certain criteria in these sort of ethical domains, but are they truly being ethical is the question.
At the end of the day, you want to look better in front of your customers, so that they don't reject you in favor of some other brand. So the whole idea is to make sure that your brand equity and your brand image remains positive in the light of the public view. But again, what exactly is shaping the public view? Where those ideas are actually coming from? And as you said, that is it really about right and wrong, or is it about what we think of what exactly is right and wrong, or what public thinks what right and wrong actually is? So it is we have seen, we have like 5,000 years of history right now in front of us, where we are very confidently say this, that if the majority agrees to a particular point, then doesn't necessarily mean that it is really good for them, or it could be very disastrous for them as well. So from a purely materialist evolutionary, or all these, if you bring in all the modernisms, secularism and liberalism, these are man-made constructs, of course, which have sprung into existence in very recent times. At the end of the day, do we really know what is really good for us? And before that, who we really know what we actually are? If we don't know who we actually are, then how can we actually decide what exactly is good for us, or what exactly is bad for us? So I think, again, the whole fundamental discussion boils down to this question: okay, who we actually are, and of course, okay, what is this thing called reality? How do we define this nature of reality that we actually exist in? And we are also part of this reality, and what all of this is all about. And so, yeah.
Very, very important. And when we spoke for the first time, not today, but a couple of days ago, we were talking briefly about well, you were mentioning, Dr. Omar, that you say you advise your students that they should seek to become self-sufficient, sort of these days, and as a very real life strategy, as a strategy for one's very own existence, and also relatedly, the issue of I forget the terminology, but sort of local, keeping things local. And could you say a little bit about, as far as
the circular economy and the local circular economy?
Yes, could you say a little bit about that, please?
Yeah. Again, the perspective. We are living in a world where the whole production system is unfortunately designed in a way which is not at all sustainable. We are damaging the environment, and we are creating poverty, and people are becoming disconnected from their own land and culture and history and everything, and becoming part of this big machine, global machine, which is producing stuff, but it kind of present itself as the savior of humanity. What exactly it is doing that? It is perhaps exploiting the 80%, so that the top 20% of the population can actually take advantage of that, or maybe if you like divide the whole population into three categories: the people on the top, the rich people living in the developed part of the world, or the people who have lots of capital with them, or and the middle class maybe, and the poor class. So what seems to be happening, that the people on the top have employed the middle class, the working class, to exploit the people on the bottom. And we assume that the system is kind of helping everybody out to get out of poverty, and is really serving everybody's need. But in this whole narrative, this exploitative tendency is actually overlooked in this process. And I'm not just, not just talking about the exploitation of the labor, but I'm also talking about the exploitation of the natural resources, the environment, and the kind of damage we have been doing to the natural environment in form of different so-called externalities. The term economists actually used to explain all the impact of the industrial activity on the natural environment and other things. So lots of people are actually coming across this idea now, that it is not really sustainable to keep on producing stuff just like that, because we are exploiting the natural environment. It becomes much more easier to exploit the labor if the labor is 2,000 kilometers away from you, or maybe 5,000 kilometers away from you, sitting in, let's say, in Singapore, and you're running a business, but the product that you are manufacturing are being manufactured somewhere in far away, at a far place. Then if this is the way things are being managed, then it is very easy for the person sitting in Singapore to exploit and take advantage of the people somewhere in the so-called third world countries. So to end this tyranny of the capital, or to end this exploitation, one of the idea which is becoming very popular is that of a local circular economy, and that actually means that we organize our production, at least of the basic necessities, in a way where we do not have to import anything from the outside. We grow everything on our own. We produce stuff on our own to the extent possible. Well, ideally, everything should be produced. There should be zero imports and zero exports happening within a specific geographical region. And typically, when we did not had uh, the kind of modern transportation that we have right now, we can actually transport tons of stuff all across the planet without any. When we did not had all of that, then the only means of transportation were horses and the very manual stuff. So typically, this was the way economy was organized, because since you cannot produce, export or import stuff from long distances, therefore you have to at least grow stuff locally as much as possible. And people argue that it would not be possible to sustain 7 billion people just like that. But I mean, are we really sustaining these 7.7 billion people at this point in time? Or are we literally exploiting them, just keeping them alive so that we can get cheap labor out of them? And so at the moment, system is already not working for so many people. And previously also, the society was not that of a hunter-gatherer. I mean, literally, cities were of the size of millions, and agriculture used to happen to feed all of those people living together in like millions at the same time, at the same place. So it wasn't just like a few hundred people and living somewhere in the wilderness. It wasn't just like that. So this complex society used to exist. Even there is evidence that before Columbus actually came to America, there was the kind of society that was in existence was very complex. It has very elaborate systems to produce stuff, and they're very culturally, they were very rich, and they had a very complex way of organizing this stuff. Even they had a kind of a law. At some places it was not practiced, despite the fact they knew there is some kind of but they did had a legal code also which was in place, and there was almost all constituents of a modern society. So things were organized previously also, for complex societies, not very different from the kind of society that actually exists right now. And if it could happen previously, then of course it can happen again. At least we can move in that direction to the extent possible, so that at least our dependence from this global system, global machine, exploitative machine is actually reduced to the extent possible. Obviously, practically speaking, 100% transformation would not be very easy, keeping in view the kind of awareness people have about this alternative. But any movement in the direction of self-sustainability would be can be appreciated or appraised in that context.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, so much to think about. And one thing that popped into my mind when you're describing the nature of a circular economy, wherein nothing is imported or ultimately exported, everything is local within a given sort of geographical location. What that would entail, I can't help but feel, it would entail really sort of drilling down on what the essentials are.
Absolutely.
Like we can't have all this kind of flamboyant excess.
Absolutely.
A certain tiny minority of society, as you rightly point out, that the figures, possibly even less than 20% of people controlling the vast majority of resource. I mean, certainly, it was pointed out to me a while ago, I remember hearing this, that those of us living in the West, we are already, this was in the time of, the sort of grassroots movement in New York, which spread globally, but the 1%, that we are the 99%, and it was pointed out that those of us living, those of us living in the West are already, we represent the global 1%, because we're very lucky, right? But nevertheless, it would entail really doing with a lot less and drilling down deep into what the essentials are. And very significantly, I think, it would entail, in a very real sense, rediscovering.
Can I share my screen?
Yes. Oh, please.
Let me.
Wait. Sorry, I need to
I've got a message that host disabled participants.
Yes. You should be able to do it now. Yes.
Okay. There it is. So, can you see this?
Yes.
This is a chart, a kind of infographics made by Oxfam. And it actually shows that the richest 10% is actually responsible for almost half of the total lifestyle consumption emissions. And the poorest 50% is responsible for around 10% of the total lifestyle consumption emissions in the world. So you can see the difference here. When it comes to polluting the environment. Only a very small percentage of people having a huge contribution in that.
Wow. Right. I mean, that says it all. And it's, it's almost like a mushroom cloud, that diagram.
Almost.
We're destroying things in really, sometimes irreversible ways. But I mean, to maintain a sort of religious, spiritual view of things, ultimately God is in charge. But in keeping with that religious, spiritual view of things, the circular economy, and if we're to rethink and reconfigure how we do stuff, we have to reawaken the deep religious impetus, right, in all the religions, without fail, of
absolutely.
charity, right?
If the purpose of my existence is not to consume, if the purpose of my existence is not to accumulate, then of course it has to be replaced with something else.
Yes.
So what exactly that is? So this is something that the world really needs. I wrote a paper recently. I submitted that for a conference, and it was on circular economy, and in that I argued exactly the same thing, that does the modern materialist worldview, where everybody's encouraged to consume and accumulate all the time, that does it really have the incentive, the psychological incentive, attraction for people to shift? Because that is not, in that kind of an economy, you will not be able to accumulate as much as possible or consume as much as possible. You'll have to focus more on your very basic needs, most likely. But if you're just focusing on very basic needs, why you're alive? What's the purpose?
Right. So maybe we're alive. Maybe the secret to living is giving. Right. Maybe the true secret to truly living is not for my own self, but for others, right? And I mean, they've done studies where they found in the States, at least, that after a certain income bracket, beyond a certain income bracket, 70,000 US dollars, that people's sort of happiness on the graph, it just plateaus. And the only reason, the only thing that makes it go further up is when people give to other people. But I'm amazing. I mean, really wonderful talking to you and connecting with you. So much we touched upon. I mean, again, this has been my experience with many podcasts with people like yourself, that just some of these individual topics, if we pick them up, we could literally write entire books on. And I mean, just to kind of give an overview of some things we talked about, Dr. Omar, you mentioned historically, because after I posed the question of why is capitalism such a problem, and you gave the history of how money was historically a means of exchange, and capitalism brought about the shift whereby people conducted businesses for the sole purpose of accumulating more and more capital, as opposed to wealth, tangible goods. And wealth has a finiteness to it. Therefore, there's only so much physical stuff you can accumulate, whereas capital is literally endless. And this brings about a significant shift historically, or maybe the historical view of how human beings came first, and the, who knows, the chicken and egg situation, but maybe they're at the same time. But the human being starts to be viewed in different terms. The human being becomes, as it were,
the Homo economicus.
Homo economicus, of course, right?
Money-making machines,
Absolutely. And human beings become a means to an end, right? Human beings, instead of becoming the end in itself, right? Human beingness and life and living, interaction and loving, etc. Human beings become the means to greater wealth, capital accumulation. And we talked also about the nature of the digital economy, how while it's been, I mean, if it were not for the digital economy and digital means, I would literally not be communicating with you now. So it's kind of
ironic, it's kind of
deeply ironic and paradoxical. So I mean, one should also be grateful, and so I'm grateful for the means, but we also have to be objective in saying that it's brought about. It has already brought about, and it's continuing to bring about major changes in how the human being itself is viewed, to the point where people increasingly are becoming, their very lives are becoming digital lives. And what sort of repercussions those have as far as our very futures. And you also mentioned Jung's point about Western man's being fundamentally disconnected from himself, and ultimately believing that we could get out of our problems through thinking, and yet there are multiple dimensions of our being, as Covey has identified, and that's traditional societies, despite the modern propaganda, right? The modern societies actually tended to acknowledge the different dimensions of people's being, and people significantly had a sense of meaning because they knew their place in the universe, in the cosmos, whereas today we no longer have that. And the global machine of capitalism continues to exploit the global, the majority of the world's population, the 80%, in order to meet the needs of a very small sliver, 20%, potentially even less. And this is something that is unsustainable, of course. We have to think really in terms of a circular economy, an economy wherein everything we produce is consumed locally, and we don't seek anything from outside. And that would entail, of course, rethinking our own place in the world, not as consumers, but maybe as producers and givers. So, because in order to give, we have to produce as well. But thank you so much, Dr. Omar. This has been really wonderful. And we also talked about Squid Game. Let's not forget.
Yeah.
Squid,
There was another, I think there was another Netflix series I was about to talk about, but I got
oh yeah, yeah.
distracted because of my.
Which one was that? Tell me, please.
It was about the name of the series is Altered Carbon, and it's about. Have you seen it, Altered Carbon? You have seen it. So the story is about people who are able to live forever in that, and subsequently, and they're also trillionaires literally in that.
Right, right.
And
all they have to do is they have to change their sleeve. It's called
sleeves, exactly,
a physical body, right?
Absolutely. And this immortality has literally made them into monsters. The kind of evil stuff they actually do, because they can do anything they want to do, and without any sense of accountability eventually.
There has to be consequences for our actions. There have to be, right? I mean, if a person can literally, what's the expression, getting away with murder, if people can, there's some people who literally get away with murder, right?
Yeah.
So then why would they, I mean, and I can't help but feel, right? And we all have this possibility, right? We all, what's the famous sort of line from Dostoevsky, that the line between good and evil runs through every man's heart, right? And who wants to destroy a piece of his own heart? But so we all have the potential to be, evil, demonic, or sort of divine in a sort of in a real sense, like imitating God or ultimately becoming servants of God. But right, so if
in the process of imitating God, most likely we're going to turn into devil.
Well, so when I say imitating God, I mean in the sort of more in the Sufic sense, right? So Iqbal mentions, adorn yourselves with the divine qualities, right? So, which ultimately entails a very real sense of, the fact of God. Whereas, I mean, if we do away with the sense of the divine, the reality of the divine, then it's and we are unaccountable for our deeds, then literally I think people become sadistic. Literally become sadistic. It's like simple things don't please them anymore. It's not enough. Like if you're a trillionaire, forget trillionaire, if you're a billionaire, right? Without a higher conscience, I'm not saying just because one has wealth, one is evil, but then I can't help but feel that in order to become a billionaire, one has to really step on a lot of people's throats. That's my sense. I mean, I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's not easy to become a billionaire by being really ethical. Anyway, one may even argue it's the same for becoming a millionaire. But in any case, if one has all the money in the world, they have so much money, they don't know what to do with it. Like, I mean, how does one please? They can have all the sex they want. They can have all the all the basic stuff. After a point, it's like, I'm going to just make people's lives literal hell. Maybe that's what pleases me. And that's kind of what Altered Carbon gets at, right? That's one of the things.
Including the Squid Game. Because that was the same point mentioned in the last episode, that, there was this very rich guy who was very bored of his life. Why? Because he was rich, and he literally mentioned that all of his rich friends are living such a boring life, despite the fact they can do anything they want to do. So life gets really boring and meaningless. And you might have heard that quote by Jim Carrey, where he says that, I wish everybody can actually get rich and famous, and so that they realize that's not the real thing.
Right. And and he's someone who really knows that world. And he's someone who's extremely successful, and I think he really thinks outside the box just to see his evolution. Right. No, this is it. And I think if one of the measures of if one of the things we emphasize over other, if we make the central focus of our lives, which is fun, right? Life is about fun. Then of course we're going to get, of course, because guess what? People become bored. It's like even doing the most fun things after a while get bored. I mean,
You're like, okay, fine. I'm already done this 1,000 times.
yeah, next
You
one.
get used to
Oh
that.
my God. I mean, what's the Quranic verse, right? God says from a Muslim point of view that he has not created this in vain. He has not created this as a realm of fun and games, to
Fun and
paraphrase.
game, yeah,
You know, it's something that is much
yeah,
deeper, has a
much
much
deeper.
purpose. Well, thank you again, Dr. Omar, so much for your
Sure,
wonderful time and for your brilliant
pleasure. It's
insights.
definitely a pleasure too.
Oh, no, no, really, the pleasure is all mine. And now I look forward to future conversations and potentially
Sure.
collaborations. And if we can think also
Mm.
creatively about how we can, benefit more people and maybe having sort of group discussions on some of these topics, bring together people from different backgrounds as well. That could maybe potentially open up the conversation even further. I mean, it's a very, very wide-ranging conversation today,
Yeah,
but it's wonderful, really lots of fun. Thank you so
sure,
much, Dr.
sure.
Omar, and talk soon.